As a straight white male executive, the system absolutely benefited me, right? It was only when I started to operate outside of that and through a different lens where I then experienced all the places where the system is broken and and by broken, I mean not providing the support, the understanding, the compassion, the empathy to help people throughout all walks of life and in all different aspects of life.
Hello, and welcome to Notes on Resilience. I'm your host, Manya Chilinsky. My guest today is Graham Skidmore. He is the co-founder of Harmony Health, and he is all about creating a world of happy, healthy, productive, and empowered people. And that is what we talked about. We talked about investing in people as individuals, about the mismatch between what systems expect of us and our own personal behavior. It was a fabulous conversation. I know you're really going to enjoy it. Graham, I'm so glad that we finally got together today for this episode. Thank you for being here.
Oh, me too. Thank you again for, like I just said, thank you for not forgetting about me and sending me the email reminder.
No worries.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a lot of great stuff going on in this podcast and some great content. So, I feel privileged to be a part of it.
Well, thank you. Well, to kick us off, what would the title of a book be about you if your worst enemy wrote it?
Why do you have to make everything so difficult?
Okay. You're asking me that, or that's the title of your book?
That's the title.
I like it. Why do you have to make everything so difficult?
Because when I look around, I refuse to believe this is as good as it gets, even before I went through everything I've gone through over the last 8 years. And so, if there's a way to make things better, then I don't understand why we're just maintaining the status quo. I don't know why we're accepting crap as the default setting and then just kind of providing optimization within a broken system when we can improve the system, when we can make things happier, we can make things better. And so inability to be a conformist or just go with the flow certainly has its benefits, and it certainly drives some people bonkers.
Yes, yes. I completely understand that. So, all right. Well, that's a great name for a book. Thank you for sharing that. I am on board the train of why should we accept things the way they are if they're not necessarily working out. I want to ask you, many of us have had a moment in our life that changed how we think about leading or how we think about taking care of people. What was one of those moments for you?
Yeah, I mean, the last 8 years of my life since June 2018, when I left the corporate world, has been an accumulation of those things. So I guess I'll try to make it short here. So over the last 8 years, I left corporate America, played the game of life the way that I thought that I was supposed to. I checked the boxes of income, status, achievement, et cetera. Right, I was on the C-suite of a 20,000 person organization, and I was the most miserable I was ever at in my life. And so I said, well, this can't be right. If I'm doing the things I'm supposed to be doing, and I'm feeling this horrible, something's got to give. And so, I ended up leaving corporate America, and then from there, going through a variety of catalysts that helped me understand myself through a Western, Eastern, spiritual, indigenous lens, and getting to understand to know myself in different ways until I was able to be as happy, healthy, and healed as I want, and being confident to take the next steps into my next chapter of life. So that really, and it turned out that I needed to, reclaim myself. I needed to remember who Graham is as my, and I needed to get rid of the guilt, the shame, the conditioning, the fear, the anxiety, all of those things that, held me back from remembering and operating as who I was. And so now I'm kind of stepping back out into the world, without those layers and with a whole new perspective.
Someone found themselves in a similar position today. One of our listeners is feeling like you were feeling when you left corporate America. What's a question for them to ask themselves to figure out what their next step should be?
Yeah, I'll give you a definition that I've created for happiness, and then that kind of they can use that to guide it. So I define happiness as leading a life of self-guided choices while being able to love yourself, others, and your surroundings. And so a lot of the times, whenever I find myself less than an optimal state, the first question I ask myself is, whose choices am I operating on? Whose choices am I acting on? Is it what I want to be doing, or is it what I think I should be doing, or what others are wanting me to do? And then from there tends to be a disconnect. And if it's the choices that I'm making and I'm still feeling that way, I'm like, okay, well, what is it about this? Is it that, what I thought I wanted isn't what I wanted? Is it what's preventing me from loving myself and this path that I'm on? And then what would be the next choice that I need to make to, fill in that gap? Because life is, live and learn as we go. So not everything is going to be right. I make a choice and now all of a sudden everything's perfect. In many cases, to get to that more ideal state requires a series of choices, which tend to come from trial and error, or I should say, living and learning.
Yes. And I love the framing of that question. Whose choice am I following right now? Whose choice am I doing? And if you realize, well, this isn't even what I want to be doing. And I think it can be so easy to get caught up in doing something we think we're supposed to be doing.
Oh, absolutely. And it's one of those things that, there are some things that and challenges that I faced that were really in the status quo. And then there are other things that I faced that I would call in more of the spiritual worlds or the communities. And like, operating on somebody else's agenda and operating off of trying to live inside of somebody else's box is one of those things that spans, all aspects of life and being.
Oh, absolutely. And you and I have, I think, similar views on the role of systems versus our individual responsibilities. And I think we really think our system is kind of one size fits all. And then we blame the individual when they don't fit into that system.
What you're talking about is exactly one of the biggest changes when I talked about being a very different person than what I was in the first 40 years of my life. In the first 40 years of my life, if you would have asked me about, my opinions on the current state, like, of course, we should be investing in AI. Of course, we should be looking at how to remove humans out of the equation. Of course, you should be focused on profit and all these other things. And, because look, if somebody hasn't made it, well, look, then, I didn't understand, I figured however we're born is what we are. And, maybe there's a little bit of upside based on education and experience, but essentially we are what we are. Well, over the last 8 years, I absolutely disproved that theory to myself. And so now I fully recognize that the greatest opportunity that we have right now is investing in humans, and it's investing in humans as individuals. So all of my work in this next chapter of life is providing a set of systems and education and tools that support humans as individuals, and in starting in health and wellness, it's, as understanding ourselves as having individualized physiologies and providing the systems that can support individualized physiologies. And that is just something that without walking through without walking in the shoes of others, so to speak, right, I never would have gained that perspective to recognize because I, look, as a straight white male executive, the system absolutely benefited me, right? It was only when I started to operate outside of that and through a different lens that where I then experienced all the places where the system is broken and and by broken I mean not providing the support, the understanding, the compassion, the empathy to help people throughout all walks of life and in all different aspects of life. And again, but without experiencing that firsthand, I didn't have the capacity at that point in my life to understand it through other lenses.
Right. We talk about individualized sort of solutions and thinking. And in the world of work, in the world of leadership in work, I think there's a lot of fear of, I want to have this one size fits all solution and everybody is going to act under that and not have to think about what do I need to do for Graham? What do I need to do for Manya? What do I need to do for the next person? I think there's a lot of fear around that.
I think anytime change in general, right? Doing anything different is always, a case of, I think, incites some sort of fear in people, fear of the unknown, right? Um, and then there is also some aspects of truth from logistically, right? Like, which is if everybody is an individual, everybody's a snowflake, then how do you create systems that support, right? And so, and there is absolutely truth to it not being easy, right? If it was easy, we would have already figured out we'd already be doing it. And I think that and I think at least for me and the way that I approach it versus what I've seen out there is that in order to provide individualized support, the way I look at it as we still operate with the same set of goals and expectations, right? That doesn't change, right? We all, in order to be productive members of society, that signifies something. We're all making contributions. When we come into work, we all need to operate a certain way. We all need to treat people with respect. We need to operate with dignity. Right? But the way that we get to understand our coworkers, the way that we understand how to read the room, right? Because we all don't read the room the same way. And when we all read the room, some of us read different things, right? But so we can all operate with the expectation of we need to read the room, but what we need is an individualized understanding of how we read the room and how that may be different than the way others read the room. And as a result of that, how do we create bridges and recognizing, hey, what I'm reading may be different than what you're reading, or what I'm reading is maybe the minority. And so here's what the majority is. And I think that's where, look, AI and technology provides a great opportunity to bridge these gaps because it allows us to provide an individualized learning experience, right? And I think that's where a lot of the struggle with the individualization comes is the time that it takes to help somebody understand it for themselves. Pre-AI world, technology could only do so much, which means that it was about it falls on the role of the leader, the manager, the boss, whatever, to then spend time with each and every person to make sure they get it. And wow, well, that's now all of a sudden, yeah, that does become very cumbersome, and that does become very prohibitive. But now when you can use technology to leverage people in through that learning process, now you can start to provide those individualized experiences and an individualized understanding. Essentially, once everybody can kind of get their feet underneath themselves and recognize the differences, then they can fill in the gaps, right? But it's those first few steps is where I see a lot of the disconnects, and so that's what I focus on, right? Is how do we use technology? How do we use understanding? How do we use empathy? How do we use stewardship to help people get comfortable in their own skin, get comfortable in their surroundings, so then they can navigate situations known and unknown, and do it in a way that is aligned with predetermined goals or outcomes that we've kind of all agreed to operate with.
Right. I think it's so interesting. The discussion right now, just out in the world, where there's so much fear and confusion about artificial intelligence, for example, even though that's a very wide field and we think of it very narrowly. But there's such a fear because some people are thinking, great, AI can replace our humans. And you're talking about using technology to become more human centric in a way.
I'd say exactly what it is. It's about being human centric. I recognize that I possess much more or many more gifts, abilities, and wisdom than I ever knew. But it was all underneath that the conditioning and the guilt and the fear and the shame and the trauma and the anxieties. And so, and in my walk of life, I've recognized that's the same thing with everybody, right? And so right now, what I feel like we're seeing with AI is what we're seeing as a byproduct of the one size fits all systems that conditioned us to all live inside of a box. And so now the box is essentially, we'll just call it understanding math, right? How well can we all understand math? And then AI represents a calculator. So now we're like, okay, if we're going to measure intelligence by how well can we all do math, well, who's better served to do that? A calculator or all humans? Well, in many cases, it's a calculator, but a calculator is reactive to its inputs. It's not creating new problems. It's not creating new algorithms, right? That's what humans are. And so, look, I absolutely believe that AI is a valuable tool, but it should be a tool to augment human intelligence and capabilities. And so it should free up, and so let it do the heavy lifting. Let it do the cumbersome work so that humans can spend their time on the things that require more human skills, that require interpretation, problem solving, creative thinking, and revenue generating items, things that will really move a company forward as opposed to the current focus, which with AI, which tends to be just how do we improve the bottom line.
Right.
But when you invest more in humans, I think you have a much greater opportunity to grow the top line and create meaningful impact.
I really appreciate the twist, especially when we're talking about AI, of from what I hear most of the conversations these days, where you're actually saying we can use it to really improve ourselves as humans and really do that personalized work that is so hard to do, especially thinking about in a work environment. You can't necessarily know everything that's going on in everyone's head and respond individually.
Yeah, it's again, it's definitely being able to understand these things from this way, recognizing only in hindsight of recognizing how I wasn't able to operate at my potential because of the tools that I lacked. And it wasn't because I lacked access, right? I mean, I had concierge medicine, I had executive coaches, I had plenty of people that were willing to work with me. But it was all about understanding the world from their perspective, understanding the world in their box, in their modality. And what I needed was somebody to understand it from my perspective so that I could understand why what I was registering was different than what others were registering and why I was constantly being misunderstood. Anyhow, and so, but yeah, I definitely had to go through a lot of my own pain to get to that point and kind of understand and make this decision as my next chapter of life of like, no, we really need to be investing in humans and not trying to replace us or minimize what it means to be human or minimize the capabilities of humans. And I think that's really where we're selling ourselves short out in a lot of these conversations is we're minimizing the upside and the potential of humans. We've kind of already accepted, yeah, we're tapped out.
Yeah, I mean, where do you think that's coming from? What's that barrier to seeing what you see?
We're rewarded for being able to fit into the system. We're rewarded for operating in tune and in alignment with the system, which means going to school, learning a certain way, learning a certain set of a common set of facts, rote memorization, taking tests that determine our intelligence, and then based on a degree on the wall that kind of is an indicator of our intelligence, we then use that to get access to a job, to pay money, to pay bills, and live inside the system. Very few, while it exists, very few things exist to teach us how to be free thinkers, to think as entrepreneurs, to dissect what's wrong with the system, and to create, to dissect what's wrong with the system and figure out how to find better ways of doing things. And then what the challenge then becomes, even some of that stuff happens, right? You've got plenty of idealistic entrepreneurs that come out, but then you've got the capitalist side of things, which then says, oh, well, let me buy that organization. And now the ideals and the promise that this tool or approach had now gets behind other things or forgotten about because of it was bought out by a larger company to maintain the status quo or to maintain their market share, their value cap, whatever it might be. And that's one of the, look, there's no capitalism is a double-edged sword. And if we don't, and as long as we believe everything is too big to fail, we really inhibit our ability to invent and innovate.
Right. Capitalism is a double-edged sword. The market-driven profit motive. Do you think there's a place for the kind of world that you want to create to fit within a capitalist system?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is. I mean, that's what my work is all about, is demonstrating that. And while I'm starting in health and wellness, it goes in from there. It goes into training and education, then employment and income generation, as kind of the three legs of the stools of society of how to have a human-centric society. But for me, I do, my approach to AI and ethical AI is about augmenting intelligence. And so the way that I'm trying to break that cycle, and I'm not trying to turn this into an advertisement, I just don't know how else to answer the question, by me taking the profits that I have and reinvesting them to support these societies. And I'm also starting my businesses as nonprofits. And my one entity that is a for-profit entity, right, is again, it's that profit is then funneled back into the nonprofits. And so it has to start small. And in order for capitalism, regardless of the economic system, capitalism, socialism, communism, if we want new to take form, it does have to be better. It can't just be different, right? And so that's where, again, my approach isn't so much, we're talking about it, right? We're talking about it now, but it's got to be demonstrated. If you want people to see a different way, to adopt a better way, to be open to or maybe another way, then it's got to be able to show how it provides incremental gains to the current system. And so, yeah, so as long as we can show that, we can continue to maintain progress and evolution.
Give me an example. How do you show these gains? How do you help somebody understand the real benefits to thinking about a human-centered system?
Yeah, so that's why I'm starting in health and wellness, right? Because the current approach is, hey, what it means to be human is this one size fits all box. And when we talk about and a lot of times when we talk about individualization, it's really about creating a personalized journey to get into that box versus
Yes.
right, versus understanding that you have an individualized physiology and the box should be your own normal. And so the way that I'm demonstrating it is by the three groups. While we're open to everybody, right, investing in all of humanity, the three underserved communities that we're working with are women, neurodivergent, and spiritually gifted. And by taking people that are only able to achieve one quality of life, one state of being, one state of health and wellness through this Western lens, this one size fits all lens, and then have them use a complementary system that approaches them as an individual with an individualized physiology, with individualized life goals, and giving them the proper support as an individual, now recognizing and seeing what their health and wellness looks like, what their quality of life looks like, what their potential now is, right? That is the biggest demonstration to show, hey, look, these are people that, especially I'll just use the neurodivergent group because that's, a little bit more obvious and it's got a lot more stigmas and unproductive stigmas and biases associated with it, is that when you take a group of people that have those unproductive biases, and now all of a sudden, when you recognize how they're properly supported, you recognize how gifted and able and the amazing contributions that they can make. Well, now you've got indisputable proof of why we should be investing in humans, why we should be investing in human-centric future, because our humans as our greatest assets we're underinvested in. And when now that we show how by investing in them, what the return that's available is, now we can start to open up a whole nother separate conversation, evidence-based, with some evidence-based information.
Right, exactly. Graham, I could go on and talk to you for hours, but we are getting towards the end of our recording here. Tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself and what you do and how they can reach you.
Yeah, so I'm just kind of getting started. I've spent the last 8 years in my living and learning and research and development and testing phase. And so now I'm just starting the Harmony, co-founding the Harmony Health Institute, which is focused on health and wellness. So if you want to, check us out there, it's harmonyhealthinstitute.com. But as far as my articles that I publish, providing different perspectives on a lot of topics that are out there, as well as getting to know yourself, or just connecting with me, just find me on Graham Skidmore on LinkedIn, shoot me a message, follow me, connect, whatever it may be. And yeah, love to meet you.
Great. I'll include those links in the show notes to make it easier for folks to find you. And thank you again. I so appreciate your perspective and that you came on the podcast to talk about it.
Yeah, thank you again so much for having me.
All right. And thank you to our listeners for joining us for this episode, and we will catch you next time. Thank you for listening to Notes on Resilience. I'm Manya Chilinsky, a speaker and advisor. My work focuses on how leaders support people through pressure and disruption. The show is edited by Neil Panji, and it's hosted on Buzzsprout. Subscribe to the podcast to stay connected and sign up for the newsletter at manyachilinsky.com/notes for monthly insights and updates.